This conference will now be recorded.
So, Kirsten, are you welcoming people to the future of real estate, or am I welcoming people to the future of real estate?
Welcome to the Future of Real Estate with Daryl Baskin, and I'm Kirsten Ulrich, and we have a really great and insightful program for you today. Daryl, what's happened in the
So,
real estate industry this
uh,
week?
the world is turned upside down in
Really?
real estate. Yeah. Um, so for a long time, things have we've had the status quo, and so if you haven't watched the headlines, they're uh,
Hmm.
rather deceptive. I think it's really harmful to the public to have
Right.
headlines that don't really describe the fundamentals of what's happening. Um, there can be truth in them, but it's not complete. So CNN's headline is the end of the 6% commission, and several things that
Hmm.
aren't regionally true. And then we I think what I want to do today is talk about redefine the narrative of what home buyers and sellers really need to know, because the discussion is not always on track with what helps a buyer, home buyer, and seller. And I think you'll find that my viewpoints really balanced by the
Hmm.
time we get to the end of it, because this is not going to be a tirade on how bad this is. I think there's some really great
Well, what
points.
happened? So if
That
I'm just catching this right now, I mean, what
I,
actually happened this week?
I guess you're right, because my head's been in it all this time. So there's this settlement. This has been going on for years of
Okay.
antitrust, that between the National Association of Realtors and MLSs, and the inclusion of compensation for buyers
Hmm.
representatives, buyers agents or brokers, to be paid out of the MLS. So, and that's paid by the seller generally. So there's been this proposed settlement, and it has to be ratified by a judge. And that is that the MLS can no longer offer compensation to the representative of a buyer, the agent representative of a buyer.
So
Now,
Daryl, what's the MLS?
the
If I don't
multiple
know.
listing service, the multiple listing service, and that's where realtors post their properties. And
Okay.
it's been the most valuable resource. Now, there are a whole lot of multiple listing services. As a matter of fact, let me point this out. Many times the MLSs are called a monopoly, but they're
Hmm.
really not a monopoly, because it's just there can be multiple MLSs in the same area. So
Right.
a realtor may choose to be a part of one, or part of four, or not a part of any in certain instances. So there's just a lot of things that change from area to area.
Okay.
So what makes the MLS so valuable? This is the crux of the
Right.
matter. So forget a lot of this other stuff. It
Okay.
can color the water, but what makes it so valuable is it's an offer of compensation. So if you list your property with ABC brokerage,
Sure.
instead of just listing it with that one agent or the agents that are in that company, that's you list it with, but the compensation employs essentially 5,000 other realtors that are in the multiple listing system. Did I
So
say that?
basically, what you're saying is it makes your property more attractive to all the agents. So instead of just having one agent, you've got thousands of agents out there marketing your property
Right,
if you're a seller.
correct. So you can
Okay.
take this in several levels. If you go for sale by
Hmm.
owner,
Hmm.
it's the number of people who see your house on Zillow, it's the number of
Hmm.
people who drive by your sign, or wherever you advertise it, wherever you market it.
Hmm.
It's the number of people that see your Facebook post that say, "Hey, I'm selling my house." If you hire a real estate agent at a brokerage, then it's the number of people that see it on Zillow and see the sign and your
Hmm.
Facebook page and stuff, and then the network that that agent has. So through MLS, when I would list a property and we say, "Look, we want to make this as attractive as possible to the most number of
Right.
agents possible," we want more people through the door, because I could certainly sell it myself and we could negotiate or have the eyes of, say, 1,000 people. But what if we had the eyes of 10,000 people? So because we're leveraging those networks. So that's really what the power of the MLS has been. So fundamentally, what's changing is, and this, if it all goes through, and by the way, let's put this disclaimer in here. there is so much unknown at this time. And we've got this document and we can look at it, but there has to be so much clarification, so much changes in forms. Everybody's talking about different options. So what we're discussing is just a general projection of what is most
But it
likely
is a projection that could go into effect as early as July.
in July. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, so right around the corner.
let's say you've got your house for sale, and suddenly this is what I think is so damaging about the headlines. Suddenly you
Right.
think, oh, good, I don't have to pay a buyer's broker. Well, you're right, you don't. But guess what? You don't have to do that today. Today you do not have to pay a buyer's broker. But why do we pay a buyer's broker? We pay a buyer's broker because we want more eyeballs. And for that buyer's agent to say, look, I'm going to drive all across town, or I'm going to deliver flyers and say, hey, I've got these houses for sale. I let buyer's agents advertise my properties for
Hmm.
sale. And I incentivize them. And I talk to my sellers and say, look, let's make this attractive for buyer's agents to sell your property. And that's what's happening in the marketplace. Now, I
So
think,
here's what I understand, right? How this is really going to impact the buyer, and that is that historically I've been able to go create, list of properties I want to go see, or my real estate agent is, saying, here's a list of properties we're going to go see. Well, now instead of just being able to show up at that home and see that property, I'm going to have to sign a buyer's agreement with that agent. And so I guess one of the questions I have is, what if there are 5 different properties that I want to see? I
well,
mean, what
there,
happens?
so, and this is the part that really becomes so complex. I don't think I've heard some really good theories, and I have some really great theories about it, if I don't say so myself. However,
Yeah.
we have to understand that when
Hmm.
you can't just pinpoint and say this is what's going to happen, because it is so complex. We have buyers who are going to say, look, I don't have time for this. I need the assistance of a real estate professional to organize these 10 properties for me to see. And now the real estate professional who used to say, okay, I can do all of these showings and I know what I'm going to get paid. And, you know, there's some security there, now has to go get a confirmation from each of the uh, home sellers brokers how they're going to get paid, or if that has to be done by the buyer, because
Which means
hold on, let me
one with,
this is an important clarification, because
yeah.
the new rule will say I have to have a signed compensation agreement with the buyer before I take them to show any houses. So that's going to be cumbersome for the buyer, but then the buyer's going to want to know, is the seller going to pay anything towards my
And
broker's
it could
compensation?
change for every property. It could, right? So literally, you am I hearing this correctly?
Is
That literally you could be, if we wanted to go see 5 different houses, I might have 5 different agreements that have different compensation for each property. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what you're hearing, and that's compensation either uh, for the buyer's broker, or the buyers to pay for their broker. Remember, the whole difference is you just can't put it in MLS. So now it has to be done manually. Let me jump tracks here for just a second, because we can be all over the place. And I always go back to this really great book that Stephen Covey wrote. It's The Speed of Trust, and it
Hmm.
talks about how how environments, and this can be governments, companies, friendships, how when people trust each other because they know that there's a way of working, then
Hmm.
things move very quickly. So governments can, when the leaders trust one another, they can just say, hey, pat each other on the back, let's do it this way, whatever, and then everything else, is subject to the
The
approval of.
old-fashioned handshake.
That's right. And
Hmm.
and that's much of what we've been doing here. So as much as I am really welcoming some of this change, I mean, it's going to change consumer expectations to benefit me as a realtor. there's a whole lot of work that's going to go into this that is going to slow the process down and make it cumbersome, at least in the first number of years to it. That's going to make it difficult for buyers and sellers. So I think we should have, if you want to celebrate it, then celebrate it cautiously, because I think there's a whole lot to be unpacked that you don't get when you read the headlines. It sounds great so let me give you an example. It sounds great that a seller is not going to have to pay a buyer's brokerage. Yay for sellers. Okay, well then what is going to happen with the number of people to come say, okay, the buyers now are going to call the other agent directly. So this
They're
takes
going
us
to call the listing agent instead of wanting to work with the
okay.
buyer's agent, right?
And here's where history is important. I've been doing this for over 30 years. When
Hmm.
I first started, guess what was happening? The complete opposite. We had sub-agency at the time, and the laws were being changed to say no more sub-agency. You're either representing the seller or you're representing the buyer.
And why was that?
Well, you would list a house and you would put it in the MLS, and any agent who showed the house became a sub-agent of the seller's broker. So you were working for the seller even though you were showing the buyer. And so
Okay.
consumer advocate groups were like, down with sub-agency, buyers should have their own representation, whatever. Okay, so they took that away.
Buyer's representation.
So they took that away and they said, okay, well, you can offer the money for the buyer to have their own representation. So fast forward to today, and now we're saying sellers shouldn't have to pay for the buyer to have a representative. And so when the buyer now calls the agent who's working for the seller, does the buyer have that level of trust? If everything you say as a buyer, everything can be told to the seller because you're talking to the seller's agent. And if the sellers are smart, they're going to hire an agent who knows how to protect their interest. And then so buyers are then going to come in and say, well, wait a minute, who's looking out for me? And so really, and then we have all the different personalities. Some
Okay, so
buyers,
I'm going to stop you right there and put you on the spot.
go ahead.
Yeah. So
This is like a circus. It's like a
yeah,
20 ring circus.
it really is. But Daryl, so given that context, right? How are you going to approach that as a professional who's seen this? I mean, you've seen decades of market changes and you've actually lived in this market. So you professionally, how are you going to approach that? Because you are a very high trust oriented individual. Um,
So really good. So I want my clients to trust me, but I also want the real estate community to trust me. I want my
Mhm.
business colleagues to know when I'm working with Daryl Baskin. I might not like the decision he makes, but I know he makes a good, high integrity decision. And
That's
I
right.
know that, because we can't always control the outcome of things, but we can do the right thing in the midst of everything that's going on. And
Always.
and right now, I think the headlines are being used to manipulate people to thinking one thing that may not be in their best interest.
Well, I think
And
it's vilifying. It's kind of
that's
vilifying, the industry. And unfortunately, if you step back and you look at this from a buyer's perspective, nothing changes really, really nothing changes from a compensation perspective because those buyer agents and seller agents, they're going to work something out that they get paid. So they're not going to be doing this for free. And so nothing changes on that. But the one that really I think is the biggest impact for a buyer is the amount of paperwork and logistics around just viewing a property, which I think maybe changes the way the industry, when you think about the different types of cameras that you're using and different vehicles to show houses, maybe we move to more of a virtual type environment instead of, physically going out and looking at those homes, or at least that's a
so
last step.
so here's, and I said my 21 ring circus analogy. So this is the ring in the circus number 18, maybe. And that is
Okay.
the expectations on a real estate agent today are one way. And
Yeah.
so when real estate agents are kind of fighting back, saying, "Wait a minute, we can't do this, whatever," and some of that's legit and some of it's not. But much of that can be based on the perceived expectation that the public has. I was on the phone with some clients last night at 10 o'clock. Well,
Mm-hmm.
negotiating a contract. But if
Mm-hmm.
I were an employee, and there's some discussion now of, does your real estate agent just become an hourly employee? Hey, I clocked out at 5 o'clock. I am not taking your call, and so that may be another attitude in another business model, but that's not my attitude. It's the type of service that you're expecting from your realtor. Now, when you're packed up on a truck on Friday at 4 o'clock,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want, and you're closing, you don't want your realtor to clock out at 5 o'clock. And I think that's what's being lost in the discussion is there are some tremendous, high efficient, very professional realtors, and they're bringing a great service to the market. But on the other hand, you have realtors, some realtors, and I'm one of them, who's thinking, hey, this ain't so bad because this is going to clear out a lot of the dead wood that has been not providing such great service to
Well, and I
the.
think you bring up a really excellent point, and that is that the intent of this is to help the consumer, and it's to put more guardrails around the transaction to protect the consumer, even though it's going to be far more cumbersome. And I kind of lived through that when we went through,
Mortgage.
Dodd-Frank
Yeah.
and the entire mortgage reform, right? And so that's really what's happening is it's a real estate reform. And I think you bring up some really good points, and that is that when you're working with your client, from your perspective, it's not going to change that much, right? Because you're still going to provide that great service. Um, the difference is, and not for you, but maybe for some agents, is they'll have to get a buyer's agreement. That's always been something that's very been standard, in the way that I've done business in the past. And so
Well,
this is
and
just no surprise.
it does help set some expectations because right now you may have there are a lot of home buyers who just expect to pick up the phone and say, I want to see this house, and you
Mhm.
better show it to me. It's kind of like this I'm entitled to this kind of and this type of ruling would say, well, I'll show you the house, but you have to sign this. We have to have an
There's a
agreement. Um,
contractual agreement to do business with me.
Now, that
Right?
agreement, those things are going to evolve over time. You might have some agents who say, well, I'm not worth anything because I don't provide a good service, so I'll do it for free. You know?
Well, and a
And
good point. Good
and just
point.
like you would hire an attorney, like I want the best attorney to go into court for me because after I see this house, I'm going to need to lean on somebody who really knows the market and has an understanding for it. And that's where realtors will be expected to provide their value. And and consumers should also um, really be interviewing and understanding. I've had a beef with the idea of just walking into an open house and using the realtor who's there because that's just somebody you met. Well, did you ask them questions? What do they know that's going to help you through this process? And I think that's what's contributed because people haven't been interviewing their realtors up front. That's what's contributed to some of this dissatisfaction. They're like, gosh, I hired an awful realtor and they got paid all this money. Well, you don't really feel that way if you hired a highly skilled professional and they brought value to the table. So ultimately, and I've said this, it's not always gone over well, but ultimately, whose fault is that? Well, you're the consumer. Ask the questions. But as a
Right.
law, this would bring us all on the same page, and it would. I think it would. I think it's really going to be pretty good in the end.
Well, but I want to just, you're a CDRE, which is a certified divorce real estate expert. And I was really reflecting on this and I was thinking about people that are going through divorces and how this actually will negatively impact, has that potential to impact, those transactions because they may not move as quickly due to
Well,
all
I
of this
actually don't.
confusion.
I'll tell you,
What do you
Kirsten,
think?
I don't disagree with why you would have come to that conclusion, but
Yeah.
I do have a different take on it. I don't think it's going to affect us at all. I mean, I look at it, and this may be kind of an arrogant sounding statement, but I know this. I know
Rose-colored
the market.
glasses.
I've been I've been through I've been through some really tough markets, and I just know people housing is like critical. People have to have a place to live, and when you understand what the market is doing and you navigate that well, then your clients do okay. So I don't see this as a big problem. And as a CDRE, as a professional who knows that divorce family, how the house has to be navigated through the family law system and through that emotional discourse that's taking place. I don't sell, I will not represent a buyer in the middle of that transaction. That's against those ethics that I've taken, because that
Mhm.
becomes a conflict of the fiduciary duty that I have with the husband and wife who are not getting along. So I can't represent the buyer. So it's I don't know that that's going to change anything that much.
Okay. So to net this out, really what's happening, you've got sellers who are trying to sell their home. What's going to happen is going forward in July, you as a real estate agent will no longer be putting in a buyer agent compensation percentage in that MLS. That field is actually going away,
Right?
and for which is could potentially be limiting for sellers as far as getting their property properly marketed, but maybe not because of the different systems that we use, etc. Then from a buyer perspective, it's that you don't go window shopping anymore, right?
Well,
When you
they'll
go
still do window shopping. The MLS isn't going away. Um,
right.
And I think this is where when I said in the beginning that there's so much speculation and so much unknown that
Hmm.
as this works its way through, we'll discover, and there will be a lot of creativity from the market. I know there will be a lot of creativity from the Baskin real estate specialists because we will be nimble. And one of the
And
things we
trying to
do.
help our buyers and our sellers, right?
Right, right. And one of the things that we've become known for, if I can toot my own horn here for just a second, is we fix we fix problems that are created by other less skilled discount brokers, whatever they may be. So some of my best lifelong clients have come from, hey, we need somebody who knows what they're doing and can walk us through this. And um, that's just what's happening. And I see even more of that happening right now. And that'll be the difference between the skilled professionals and the ones who have historically, traditionally been like, oh, I do this on the weekends part time or kicking tires. This is a serious career, and it's really going to make it even better.
And so
So
we just look at this very positively on how it's going to impact our clients.
it's a positive mess.
Oh,
What I say, and there's the short term and there's a long term. Short term, we don't, we're just going to walk through it. We're all going through it together. I would strongly advise. I don't care who your realtor is. I would strongly advise uh, that you realize there is a marketplace out there, and you want the bulk of the marketplace, and incentivize, pay other realtors well, and because if you don't pay them well, guess what the buyer's going to do? The buyer's going to come and say, oh well, you're not offering a buyer broker's fee, so I want to discount your price by 3%.
that's
Okay,
right.
well, how's that helping you as a home seller? Or as a home seller, if you're saving the money, you're like, oh, I'm going to give it all to the buyer. So that's the part of the market when you start comparing to, well, this house down the street, now we have comps. Did this one pay a buyer broker, or did this one pay a buyer broker? And now we're having this, human nature, the psychology of fair is really complex, and
Yeah,
sometimes it's not
distrust,
based.
right?
It distrust. There you go, and the speed of trust. Sometimes it's not based on what I'm getting. My and this is not me. Let me use another example. Sometimes it's based on because I don't necessarily think this way, but human nature is sometimes it's often it's
Yeah,
not what you're getting. It's that you don't want someone else to get something, and
yeah.
so you'll
Fear of
actually
loss,
yeah, you'll hurt yourself just to make sure they don't get something. And
competition.
And that is a very destructive process. So that's not going to make this an easy transition for a whole lot of people. And customer satisfaction, I'm always going back to, my goal is to get people to the closing table and have a 5-star rating, that I help them navigate the process in a
Mhm.
way that they felt in control and that they had influence over what was happening, so that they can say, you did a 5-star job for me. And that is going to be very difficult uh, for people who are having that fairness challenge of, well, but I didn't get, or they got. And so you really need to have a pro to walk you through it. I'm just
Well, and I think, one of the things I really appreciate you, um, is we're actually going back through systems and processes and aligning with all this ahead of the schedule, right? So we're going to be focusing on it. So we're going to be ready to, tackle any situation, whether you're a home buyer or a seller, because we're on it.
Absolutely. And if you can't tell, I am so energized. I think this
Yeah.
is so exciting. It's like, yeah, let's change the rules. I'm not scared.
No, it's
And
a great opportunity to deliver extraordinary service, right?
yeah, and to walk people through a challenge. Moving your family is like you're uprooting your nest. Like, where's your toothbrush? The kids need to, where are the kids' shoes? The traffic patterns are different because getting to school, it's a new school. You've got everything. You wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and your brain that's like in hibernation mode, and you run into the wall. But you know what I'm talking about? I mean,
Oh yeah.
everything is different. That's why this is one of the most stressful things that people go through, is when they're uprooting all of their routine. And now going through this process with all of these changes is going to be a challenge for a little while. And it's going to be, guess what? It's going to be okay. Everything's going to be
That's right.
okay. In the end,
That's
it's all going to work out.
right.
So, Kirsten, I really am. I don't know if you're hosting or if I'm hosting, but
Oh,
you've been watching the future of real estate, just kind of a special edition here, since this is the first time in 30 years that we've had such a landmark change in how real estate will operate. So good to have you. Find out more at darrylbaskin.com. One address, thousands of homes, darrylbaskin.com, or you can always call us the old-fashioned way. We're high tech, but you can find the number down below. My direct cell phone is 918-732-9732. See you next time.